Great. Should we start? Are you guys happy to start? Awesome. Great. Well, thank you so much for being with us today. Welcome to today's CodeBase on the Couch, our weekly series of webinars. I'm Yasmin. I run the Creative Bridge program at CodeBase, and we're delighted to welcome our speakers today, Jess McBeath and one of our Creative Bridge alumni, Lynda-Marie Taurasi. Hello.
Hello.
I'm going to hand over to them both in a moment, but if you didn't see my question from earlier, if you could let us know what you are looking to get out of today and what social media platform you're most interested in, just pop that in the chat. It'll be really good for us to have that information as the talk goes on. So without further ado, our speakers today are Jess and Lynda-Marie. Jess McBeath is a specialist in online harms, including harmful content online, media literacy, relationships, privacy, and online reputation. She delivers cutting-edge training on staying safe online and leading positive, engaged, and responsible digital lives. Lynda-Marie is an award-winning digital creative who specializes in communicating impact from research and innovation communities as founder of creative consultancy Taurasi Inc. She works in Scotland's innovation sector as a senior marketing executive with i4 Product Design. So Lynda-Marie, you're going first, right? Do you want to take it away?
Sure. So this talk today is actually a high-level take on a workshop that Jess and I put together for Women in Tech Scotland that happened last year. Jess and I met at a Girl Geek meetup after work one day, and we just thought our two expertise kind of blended together for people who were working on their brands, as Jess and I at that time, and still are working on our brand. So we wanted to bring this together of people who were either looking to position their personal brand or wanted some information about how to take their brand to the next level, if for their personal business or professional business or corporate tactics or however. But first, what to do in that first step in moving forward, and that is when I give it to my colleague, Jess.
Okay, over to me. Thank you very much. So, hoping you can all see on screen, we've put together a little presentation, and I quite like using this particular format because it allows us to speak directly to you, and also you can see on screen at the same time. So as Lynda-Marie explained, I'm going to talk a little bit about digital you and kind of managing your online presence in terms of reputation. And Lynda-Marie is then going to talk about some of the aspects of kind of being creative and creating the brand that you want to have online. So without further ado, let me just see if I can click through here. So who are you online? Okay, we've got a poll question for you. Hopefully it should come up into the poll. And the question is, have you ever looked yourself up online? Okay, so if everybody could fill in the poll, that would be really great. I would love to see how many of you, or what percentage of you, have actually looked yourself up online in some guise or not. So hopefully you see the poll question up on screen there and can fill it in. And then should we see some responses? I'm just going to move this so I can see a little bit. Right, most of you have. That is brilliant. That is absolutely fantastic. So obviously that's the first step in terms of you managing your online brand, your online reputation. 80% of you said, yeah, I've looked myself up online. Some little tips for that, if you're going to do it again, and I would recommend doing it regularly. Make sure you're not logged into whatever service you're using. So if you're on Google, for example, try and do it incognito mode or not logged in, because what you want to do is see how you look to other people. And obviously a lot of the search engines are tailoring content to you. They know who you are. So try and do it incognito mode. When you search for yourself, put your name in speech marks so you get an exact phrase. But also try searching for things like nicknames, usernames, anything else you can think of. Look up things like on your social media, have a look and see how your profile looks to other people, that kind of stuff. So I think it's really interesting as a first step to understand our online brand, how we appear to other people. And sometimes there can be content there that is surprising to us that we didn't think was there. I'd be really interested to see in the chat if anybody has found content that they weren't happy with. You don't need to overshare, but what you did about that and whether you managed to get it taken down or not. Because it's something that I do a little bit of work on with people, is just about how you can remove content if you're not happy about it being there. And one of the key things for us, of course, thinking about our online reputation is not just what we post and share and like online, but it's what other people do as well. So I'm particularly mindful, as we are all online so much more at the moment, about what we're sharing online, and maybe not thinking about that, maybe not thinking it through as much as we maybe should. So what I'd like to talk about as well is this idea of old content. You might recognize the logo on screen. I'd be interested to see if anybody puts in the chat if they recognize the logo. I'm just having a look at the comments here. Oh yeah, so somebody's mentioning, talking about Instagram and Facebook and brand management. Great, so Lynda-Marie will pick up some of those bits in a little while. The logo on screen is Bebo, and it was one of the first social media. And the point I'm really making here is we do need to be mindful about, we're great at signing up for stuff, right? We're great at trying something out. We're not so great at unsigning up from stuff. And that doesn't just mean deleting the app, it means actually going in and removing our profile or deactivating our profile, thinking about some of that data that's in there, particularly when it's been older content like this. I think in the last couple of years, we've become a lot more conscious about privacy and data and what information there is about us. But way back when, we didn't do that so much. So again, another thing that you can think about is actually being mindful of what have I signed up to in the past? And maybe I need to go back and review some of that, you know, and kind of get rid of that content. But particularly today, what I wanted to cover was thinking about video conferencing. Okay, so here's an example of being on TV, right? You might recognize this one of things going wrong, things maybe not going how we had expected them to go. And we're all on TV now, right? So I don't know about you, but I'm doing a lot of webinars, I'm doing a lot of meetings, I'm attending a lot of webinars where I'm on screen as well. So I think it's really useful for us also to start thinking about our reputation in terms of how we present ourselves when we're on screen. So I've got some tips for that, but I've also got another Q&A for you. So my next question is, are virtual backgrounds a good idea for professional meetings? I want to hear what you think about that, because of course Zoom did the virtual backgrounds. Now you can get them in lots of different video conferencing platforms. I'd like to see what your responses are to that. So the question should have popped up for you. I'm just going to click on it so I can see it. Here we go. Are virtual backgrounds a good idea, do you think, for professional meetings? So while you're having a little vote on that, I'm going to move on to my next slide. So things to think about when we're video conferencing. Now, some of this is going to be obvious, right? But you know, sometimes it's useful to just state the obvious: clothing. So particularly in terms of professional meetings, sometimes the clothing that we might have worn in a face-to-face event isn't going to work online. So, and this works for anything really that's about video. So we have to think about stuff like, you know, spots and stripes. We have to think about, oh, have I missed here it is. The polls come up. Ooh, fascinating. Right, so half of people have said that virtual backgrounds are a good idea for professional meetings, and half have said they haven't. So it suggests to me that there's a real question on that one. And I'm going to come back to that in a minute as to what I think. You might have a different perspective, but I'll tell you what I think. So anyway, I was talking about clothing. So yeah, so you know, spots, stripes, stuff like that. The general advice for anybody that's kind of going on TV has also always been to think about not wearing, not for example having really long earrings, not waving as I'm doing now, waving your hands around too much. The idea is that you want the viewer to really focus on you and what you are saying and not be distracted by what you're wearing. You may of course also want to think about makeup and stuff like that, what works. It might be different in terms of the lighting. Thinking about lighting, let's just move on here. So lighting obviously is really important. I've been struggling to get my lighting right because I'm sitting by a window, so I get too much sunlight coming in. So lighting is important, thinking about how you look to other people. Remembering, of course, that when we're on screen, that can get recorded, it can get screenshot. There might be an unflattering light, you know, that you haven't really thought about. But also camera angle. I don't know about you, but the number of meetings I've been on where I'm looking up everybody's noses is not pleasant, right? And it's not natural. So again, we just want to think about the kind of camera angle that we've got and where our camera is placed, because what you want to do is be able to have more of a feel for that kind of relationship and the one-to-one contact that you would have face-to-face background. Okay, so the virtual backgrounds. I'll give you my comment on it. You can feel free to disagree. I think virtual backgrounds are great. I don't think they're particularly great for a professional setting. I think they're okay for, you know, just a team meeting, etc. If you're meeting with the boss, you're delivering any kind of presentation. And the reason for that is firstly, they're not very realistic, right? So you kind of look like you're in space. but you know what I mean, you look weird, but also you get this kind of pixelating effect around the head, you know, when you move around, and because the system's trying to work out where your hair stops and the background starts. So I think it's not necessarily, you know, the best. Well, obviously the flip side to that is thinking about what your background is, if you're going to use a real background. And again, the advice is about kind of calm, plain. I don't know about you, but you make a lot of assumptions about people when you see their backgrounds on screen, right? So have a think about that. And again, it's almost this distraction factor as well. Are people going to be spending time thinking, what is that on the shelf behind you? Yeah, rather than focusing on what you're saying. Joining video conferencing, you know, obviously testing out all of your tech before you join is really important. You don't want to get it wrong, particularly depending on the meeting, because your sound doesn't work, etc. So that's kind of an obvious one. But the final one, actually, I think is probably the most important one, your resting face, right? What are you doing when you're not the person speaking, particularly for the meetings? So resting face can sometimes look like boredom, yeah? Or maybe you are bored. Even worse, sometimes we might be tempted to multitask, so we just can't help ourselves but start reading our emails whilst we're also on this call. So just have a think about what your face looks like when you know, because you want to look like you're engaged. Ideally, of course, you want to be engaged. So there's really a question there about quality of meetings online. I had a chat with a friend about this the other day, and she said that she just had a joint video call with various people at work, with one of the bosses who had, and I'm sorry to say this, who had just been on screen talking, blah, had finished talking, and somebody else was talking, but the main screen was still set on them, and she decided to pick her nose. So she did that in front of everybody that was on the meeting. So just be mindful, clearly, of that. And obviously, as soon as you multitask, there's a potential that you forget what you're doing on screen. So that's just a few of my tips, I suppose, about kind of managing yourself online, particularly right now, because we're doing so much on camera. And that's me. That's my bit done. I shall hand over to Lynda-Marie, who's going to take you in quite a different direction now, thinking about achievements. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jess. I always feel that when she talks about the background or when she talks about the resting face, she's referring to me, but I'm not the colleague who picked her nose at a video conference. One of the great things about our workshop and coming together is that we have people who have different opinions of how they present themselves online. Clearly, we showed an example of Jess taking a very professional and plain background, and then me having a little bit of authenticity and showing who I am. And that's kind of where your branding comes from as well. Not all backgrounds and not all platforms are created equal. And so you really want to pick a platform that best suits your achievements and how you can capitalize on it. And that's what we are presenting here in this part today. So when we presented this in Women in Tech in Scotland last year, what we didn't anticipate was the questions that people had in terms of how to turn their achievements into content. So we thought it would be really great to open that up today and have a couple of questions. But a couple of the examples that we were able to hash out right there on the spot was, for instance, I don't have a creative career. My career is very tech-based, and I still want to be able to display it and still display my work. How can I do that in a platform that if I'm not the creative type? Well, most people today now have a LinkedIn profile, and that is probably the best platform across the board for showcasing your work if you don't want to do a lot of effort, or if you're like me and you're bootstrapping your business as you go along, because there's no point in being fancy if it's not profitable. So I gave a good example about how you can take a recommendation or you can take feedback on your performance and you can add that as a testimonial if it's a client-based, or a recommendation if it's a personal or professional individual based. So if you were giving a recommendation to a former colleague, as what is displayed here, you can put that up. Then you can ask them for permission or ask them to give you a recommendation on LinkedIn, or ask them for permission to take a quote of their feedback and that they could either put it on their, submit it as a recommendation and post it on your profile, or you can take it and screenshot it or add that quote to your website as a testimonial or recommendation to promote yourself if you're like me, a solopreneur, or if you're trying to get a new job, or if you're trying to pivot your career into the next level. Another great example that someone had at the conference was they were a researcher. And also you don't really think about how to be creative in doing something academic based. And that's exactly where I come in. And she said, well, I'm going to Australia and I'm doing this research and it's not really friendly as far as creative wise, content wise. What can I do? I said, well, you're going to Australia. You're going to be seeing lots of new experiences and scenes. That's your Instagram grid right there. And then you can then attach your research to it or give a snippet of what you're doing that day. It doesn't have to be lab-based. It doesn't have to be literal. That's where the creative comes in. So that's just 2 tips I wanted to give you right now. We're going to toss it back to CodeBase. Thank you for having us. And I'm noticing that I am blocking myself. Any questions? I know that we had a few in the chat.
Thanks, Lynda-Marie. Thanks, Jess, as well. There were a couple of things in the chat, and I've got some questions as well. But yeah, if you've got any more questions, please pop them in the Q&A or the chat as well. So I don't know if you saw in the chat, Lynda-Marie, a couple of people are asking about Instagram. So Anna's asked about how she can use Facebook and Instagram to get more active followers. And Abby's asked a bit about Instagram as well, and how to pick a niche. She's an animator and a brand identity designer, but a lot of that work is kept behind NDAs, which makes sharing things on Instagram difficult. So sometimes she doesn't post for months on end. Do you have any tips to share there?
I always think NDAs is an interesting argument because you are part of that NDA. So you get to say what your boundaries are as an artist. And part of that NDA is asking for permission to showcase your work. Most of the time, if it's something that's not too personal, or if you're not giving that illustration over as a license for a corporation, for instance, or a company to use as part of their own branding, then that shouldn't be an issue. But most people you see who showcase their work have written that into their NDAs to begin with. And it's okay to negotiate that as far as if you wanted to maybe negotiate your fee or negotiate their creative control. It would really just depend on an individual basis. But I would say as an artist or a creative, don't be so quick to sell yourself short. That is still your design work as long as you don't sign it over to them.
Great. And what about Facebook and Instagram getting more active followers? How would do you have any tips on how you can do that?
Yes, I think I am the worst when it comes to promoting my own self, but I would say you have to have engagement. If you have a stagnant page, you're not going to really be that active follower that people are going to want to see your feed as it comes live down the grid. I would have chats. I would also, a great way to grow followers right now is what's trending is kind of piggybacking on someone else's Instagram feed by having joint chats. And so doing so exposes your audience to their audience and vice versa. And that works as well as Facebook, but I think it's better with Instagram.
Great, thank you. If you've got more questions, please pop them in the chat or the Q&A, but I have some questions for you in the meantime. We were talking a bit about virtual backgrounds, and obviously the audience is split on that.
As are we.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I'm not really sure what I think about them either. But what I have seen is quite a few branded virtual backgrounds. So at events, for example, everyone who is on the team for that particular event might have the same virtual background indicating that they're part of the team. What do you think about those? Do you think those are more professional, or do you still feel like they're not quite right?
I don't think it's a question of being professional or not. I think it's a question of what suits the image that you're trying to give out, which is your brand. And either it's a corporate brand or your personal brand. If it's something that you're trying to be kitschy or cute, then that works. But if you're trying to perhaps give a message, you could use the virtual background to spell out a message, and that would work splendidly. Or as Jess pointed out before, it could sometimes be a distraction. So the medium can be the message, but also don't forget that you are the message as well.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. I think it's about being purposeful, you know, actually thinking carefully about what it is you're trying to get across. So if you've got a virtual background that you're putting together because you're trying to show your brand, then great. clearly I would still test that out. You know, it's reminding me, wasn't there a political conference or something where there was some wording on the back of something and a letter fell off? You know, I mean, you do have to think about, you know, how's it going to work. I've also been in meetings where with somebody where they had something on the wall in the back, like they had a poster or something like that was their brand. So of course it doesn't have to be virtual. Whatever it is, it's about making sure that it works. And I think that's probably the key message from the whole presentation, because what you've seen, as Lynda-Marie mentioned at the beginning, is you've seen two little bits of a much kind of bigger workshop that we do, which is why it seems a bit clunky. But really the underlying message in all of that is about actually having purpose in what we do online. So whatever we're sharing, just having a moment to think about, what am I doing this? Why am I doing it? And is it portraying me in the way that's going to be helpful to me or not?
Yeah, it's interesting because I totally take your point, and I think being purposeful about how you portray yourself is so important. But I also think that, I mean, are we, 11 weeks into lockdown now, something like that? Although obviously a lot of things have relaxed, but most people haven't gone back to work if you're able to work at home. And I think a lot of people are getting really tired of having to be on all the time when they're at home as well. So how do you balance that fatigue with still trying to make a good impression and trying to convey your brand effectively?
That's a tricky one. Go on, Lynda-Marie.
Sorry, I think it really comes down to the content. You can clearly see when someone is ripping off of someone else, or you see a format that people are using when they're promoting their own individual feeds. It's not even they're part of a brand, or they're not trying to promote a personal brand. They're just doing what they think is a mold. And I think what this quarantine and this lockdown has really done is kind of rip that off from people, because not only we're in the same boat, but we're not being able to like present ourselves in the best light. You know, we're not getting our hair done if that makes us feel good. We're not able to get a new outfit for a webinar or whatever it is that you do. So it's coming across as being authentic. And when you're authentic, and that's by choosing a platform that isn't, you know, the du jour or on trend, it's what's working for your company. And that just might be LinkedIn, or that might be Twitter, or it might be Pinterest, or it may not be a social media at all. It just might be your website. It's producing things that are authentic, they're true to yourself, and at the end of the day, you're presenting something that you feel comfortable with, regardless, because trends change and situations change. But then there's also a safety aspect to that as well. So I'll give it to Jess to take that part.
In terms of safety?
Or just security.
In terms of managing yourself online, sorry. Yeah, I mean, there's huge issues, obviously, to think about when we are presenting ourselves online. So what I was thinking of, though, was that what you'd mentioned there was the kind of work-life balance issue as well, because that's what kind of you were talking about, was this idea of getting fatigued. So I can kind of talk about both, really. There was definitely an element of, I think we're getting a much better understanding that actual video conferencing is easier in one way because we haven't got travel to work and all the rest of it, but actually it's quite fatiguing to do it. We miss a lot of the cues that you would normally get when you were interacting with people. So you're not, you know, the eye contact isn't really there. Everybody's looking the other way when you're trying to look at everybody on the screen. You can't really see the body, you know, what's happening to people's body, whether they're slumping, etc. And so we're actually having to concentrate a little bit more to kind of listen and understand what's going on and manage the technology, and that's really tiring. So clearly there is an element, I think, of the kind of work-life balance. I also feel, having been 10 or 11 weeks into lockdown, there was an element at the beginning which was like, wow, you know, we're all in it together, and we kind of plow on and we get on with it. Actually, we're coming to the point now where we are starting to be, although lockdown is easing, we are not at the end of this thing. So we are really starting to, for a lot of us, this will have fundamentally changed the way we work, and we will be doing a lot more of working from home and video conferencing. And so I think there is an element of need to really think carefully about how we put boundaries around our online work, both in terms of the fatigue, but also, as you say, the kind of being on all the time. There are lots of safeguarding and security issues about being online, as we've heard, right? We had all the Zoom bombing. We have issues of kind of children walking in, you know, we've got naked people undressing because they don't realize they're on camera. You know, there's quite a lot there. And I think people are a lot more mindful now about some of, particularly the security issues around about it. Anybody that's managing staff, of course, also needs to think about the kind of mental health, because for some of us, we really are going to be struggling with not having had that kind of joint, well, leaving the house, but also having kind of joint work with other people, and that physical interaction that for some of us is really important.
And the evasiveness of it. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Go ahead.
But not everybody wants to be on camera. Not everybody wants to, you know, present themselves in their home during a meeting or on a conference call. And I think even that's when you can take this personal branding, maybe not so much as like, oh, I'm going to create a personal brand, but I'm going to take elements of this and show how I present myself, or create boundaries in how I present myself. So I might only use a corner of my room that I feel comfortable with when I'm presenting myself at a video conference call. Or I might just wear a quarantine outfit for every meeting I had, which I tried to do for like the first month. And then after a while, you get sick of looking at yourself.
Well, that kind of leads on to my next question. I am so tired of looking at myself.
Yeah.
I also find that if I hide my view, then I feel like sometimes I forget that I'm on screen in the way that you were talking about, Jess. I'm pretty sure I haven't picked my nose on camera yet, but there is a risk. But I mean, sometimes, and I would never do this with an external call, but occasionally with calls with colleagues, I'll just turn my video off. And like, what would you say? I think a lot of people don't feel like they can do that. But what's your feeling on that? On, you know, if you're just not up for being on camera, can you just turn your video off?
I will be happy to answer that to you, because I had a recent situation where I was having a meeting with someone, and clearly as I'm talking to you right now, I want to look at your face, but the camera is a wee bit above you, you know, so that's distracting. However, I'm sat there having a conversation with someone, and I see their eye level go behind me, and they're scooping out like my kitchen, you know, and they're saying, oh, I'm just looking at you know, your cabinets, and you know, that's an invasion of space. That's an invasion of your personal space and your boundaries. And I have been in meetings where I'm like, you know what, I'm sorry, I'm going to shut off my camera right now. When you're at work, you're at work. You're at a physical place, you're presenting yourself. Hopefully, you know, you're dressing appropriately to go to work, and you are on that way transitioning from your home to work. You're, whether you realize it or not, you're putting your mind in that mindset, in that frame of mind. When it's at home, you know, Jess and I, right before this conference, I was like, okay, I'm going to stage my background so that they get, you know, a different take. But, you know, when I shut this camera off, I'm still at home. This is still my space, and I may not want to share that with everybody I have to do business with.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a related question from Vanessa. Have you got any tips on how to overcome nerves when on team calls or video conference calls? It's something that might not necessarily happen in real life when you're having a conversation in person.
Oh, that's a tricky one. I was going to mention it. It reminds me actually as well. Interviews, right? Because recruitment has moved online, so we're now being interviewed online, and it is really nerve-wracking. So, you know, like anything else, we have to. The technology can go wrong. I mean, I'm continually having issues with the technology. I deliver webinars, and I had another issue this morning with it. So, you know, testing all of the tech, I mean, absolutely super cool, and having a backup is probably a real, you know, if you've got a meeting or something that you really need to be at, or you're talking to a client or something like that, then just make sure you've got a backup set up, even if that backup's just their phone number so that you can phone them. I kind of, with Lynda-Marie on this as well, is at the moment it feels like we're overburdened with the requirement to be on camera, and actually there's bandwidth with that. We don't always need to be on camera. So again, in terms of managing our whole overall time, certainly if we're looking at how we engage with colleagues, it might be that you have, you know, a regular meeting where you're all on screen, but it doesn't mean that every single meeting with you has to be on screen. If you don't feel comfortable, you just switch off the camera, and you can always find reasons for that. Oh, my camera stopped working, right? It doesn't have to be, do you know what I mean? So I think all of that, testing it out and just getting the feedback. But yeah, you know, nerves, we all struggle with nerves whenever we're kind of in public, and part of it I think is just getting used to the medium if we haven't really done it before.
I can actually also add to that as far as recruitment goes and the video conferencing. A lot of times now you'll have a video where they'll give you a question, you have 3 minutes seconds to, or, whatever, 60 seconds or 90 seconds to present your answer on video. And that's really nerve-wracking. I would say always script out exactly what you're going to say and practice it enough to the point where it doesn't sound scripted so that you feel comfortable. You don't have to do every single word that's on that paper. You can just speak to it because you've done it before and it's in your head. That way, if it's a one take, then you're fine.
Yeah. That's the other thing actually about interviews and things like that, of course, is you can have bits of paper with you. You can have all kinds of prompts and things like that you wouldn't normally have if you were face to face. So there are some benefits to it all as well.
Definitely, yeah. There's a comment from Nalini, which she says, I've had a lot of Zoom meetings at work and it is really stressful when things go wrong with the technology. It is just a lot more stressful, I think, than being there in real life. There's another question from Nalini here, which is related. Any advice on the etiquette of Zoom meetings in terms of when it's okay to speak? In normal circumstances, we just interject in conversations, but that's harder to do on Zoom. Do you have any ideas?
Yeah, so again, depending on the conferencing platform, you do get different options. So you might have a raise hand option, which is a button on the screen, or you might even just do the raise hand thing. So if you are having a video conference and I don't know, there's 5 or 10 people, there's minimal numbers that you can see them all on screen. You probably want to have somebody chairing, right? Somebody's delivering whatever, and you can do the kind of raised hand, I'd like to speak next. I think there's something here about meeting management. Right? We've always complained about meeting management. But, I do think we probably need to get a bit smarter about meetings where we are properly planned. There is work to do in advance. You meet for the minimal amount of time with the minimal number of people with a goal in mind to make a decision on something, and then you finish. You're going to have problems with stuff like the resting face if you've got, 10 people on a call and somebody's waffling on about something, she says, and I'll stop talking now.
Every single time you say that, I just immediately become mindful of what face I'm making. I will also say that these meetings are a good time to assign a facilitator. And that should be the case whether it's virtually or in person. Have someone who's in charge of moving that meeting along and being mindful of people's time. If you have to look up something in a meeting and you're sharing your screen, don't let that person just be sat on the other end while you're looking at something that should have been done beforehand. Just being a little bit cautious, because there is a little bit more ownership when you are now in your own home. You're not going to be judged in your own home when you're presenting yourself, nor you're going to have your time taken away from you. There's just something about now people are being exposed to their homes and their environments. And that's why this boundary issue is coming up again and again and again. It's the first time we're actually having, if you were a freelancer like myself for years, or you worked from home remotely like Jess has for years, and you're used to it. But for a lot of us, this is a new realm. This is a new venture for us.
Yeah. So we've got a question from Abby. Sorry, it's taken me a little while to get to your question, Abby. She says, I've seen lots of places create one piece of content, say a stream, and then edit it for several different platforms, maybe cutting it down for YouTube and then cutting it down further for Facebook. What are your thoughts on that model of content creation?
I think that's a perfectly fine thing to do. I would, though, customize it as much as possible for each platform. That's not always feasible. It just depends on your own individual bandwidth. If you're a one-trick pony and kind of all yourself, or jack of all trades is what I'm trying to say, then you can slice and dice it and just make it look engaging. Just keep in mind, not everybody who is going to follow you across different platforms. So you might think, oh my gosh, I'm reusing this content or I'm reposting, but your audience may not see that across your 4 different platforms. They might just be following you on the one. I would just say, if you can, switch it up a wee bit, make it so that it's different, just in case there's someone they're getting a different facet, a different angle, a different lead, a different side. But it's totally okay to reuse content. That's just being smart.
Great. And there's another question from Vanessa. Thank you for all your questions. Please do keep asking them either in the chat or the Q&A. She says, with the oversaturation of Instagram accounts and the pressure to churn out perfect photos each time, how do you make yourself stand out without appearing fake?
Is that for me?
Either of you.
I think it just goes back to being authentic. If you are being who you are, no one can accuse you of being fake. However, if people have been following you for a while, or they know you, even if they don't know you personally, it can possibly see you change things up if you're borrowing from someone else or taking for someone else or just doing something that's not authentically you. What was the first part of that question?
Sorry, I'm on mute. It was the oversaturation of Instagram accounts and the pressure to churn out perfect photos.
I think what you're seeing, what was happening before the lockdown, which is happening now, is a throwback to before everything became so curated. That's why portable cameras are becoming popular again at concerts. I don't know why. I have plenty of post 1990s concert takes that were throwaways. That was a bad idea. Definitely be able to see your photos at a concert first. But it's that whole candidness, that whole I'm just gonna not have everything so curated and staged and perfect. You know, messy and complicated is fun. And sometimes it works in branding depending if that's your angle. But that's why I think people are just becoming a little bit more, it's transparent. People can tell. People can tell when you've got your tableau and you're just kind of putting what should be Instagrammable instead of what's authentically you.
Great.
I suppose I would just come in there with the other angle. Which, I mean, you alluded to this earlier, Lynda-Marie, which is about we're seeing an increasing blurring of the boundary between professional you and personal you, right? And this situation at the moment is only going to make it worse because we're just so much online, and that's how we're using technology so much to communicate with one another. So I suppose, I mean, I don't want to give mixed messages. We absolutely, we want we want to think about being purposeful online. There is absolutely an authenticity at the moment as we're seeing into each other's homes, and I think there is, that really is really helpful in terms of connection. What we of course also need to be mindful of is the really authentic stuff that might be online about us and whether we really want it there or not. Yeah, so it's just that idea of making sure. So, those photos of that holiday that you took last year when you were, on a binge drinking all night, that might not be something that you want to pop up on social media somewhere. It might be stating the obvious, but we see it happen again and again and again. Old tweets pop up, and somebody loses their job because of it. So we do, we just need to have a little bit of a positive mindset thinking about how we want to appear online. And that's not to say that we're all going to get our teeth done and suddenly, have wonderful suntans and we're wearing wigs or whatever. That's not to say that. It's just about recognizing who you actually want to portray yourself, as we do in real life, right? That's what you do when you go out. It's like, putting your lipstick on before you go to the shops, that kind of thing. So
not everybody needs to see you take your meeting in your onesie.
No, and it is surprising, but we are seeing organisations that have to issue guidance to staff to say, please don't be wearing your pajamas when you come on video call. I mean, it's surprising, but there is that. So,
oh, what was it that we were just while we were planning this earlier a couple of weeks ago? We came across an article of an attorney who presented in court from her bed, like she was lying in bed, sat up, and presenting with her PJs on. I mean, no, that's not being authentic, that's being lazy.
So I suppose on a similar kind of note about content creation, are there any off-the-shelf tools that you'd particularly recommend, either of you?
Absolutely, and as you know, as Creative Bridge, we love Canva. As Canva, Adobe Spark, Lumen 5, these are just a few platforms I'm just throwing out. Instagram has also accessories, I would say, for apps that you can do on the fly. Adobe Spark and Canva also has web-based as well, which is nice too. Although I would say things like InDesign are becoming much more accessible in terms of how people are using it and the tutorials and the content that they're producing so that you can make your own content. I think don't be afraid to kind of get in there and challenge yourself to upskill in some of these design-based platforms, but also, if you need to have your hand held a little bit, then the templates work too.
And things like Canva, I mean, they're all free. You can start using them for free, so that there shouldn't be a money barrier there either. Just going back to your previous point, Jess, about like your private life, there's a question about if you're creating a blog or wanting to increase your online presence, would you recommend setting up separate social media profiles to keep your private life private?
Oh, I'm going to do the usual on this and go, it depends, right? It depends what you need to do. Depends who you are. What I would say is, if somebody wants to find out about you online, they're going to be able to do that. They're going to be able to find you. So whether you've got a personal profile or it's all in one is entirely up to you. It's really very much dependent on how things work for you and what your job is, for example. So if you are an individual who's like an entrepreneur, then you are your job, if you like, then maybe that's very much one and the same thing. And so and maybe being you and part of you is very much, your sales point. And so it's all very much blended in. I think on the other hand, we also have some professions who are targeted online. Yeah. So for them, actually, they may want to not easily be findable online, and they might want to have separate profiles. It's slightly compounded by the fact that depending on the platform that you're on, they might have their own requirements. So Facebook, for example, has a real name policy. Yeah, it doesn't really want you to have multiple profiles that are actually the same person. If you're in a work context, there are some safeguarding issues. If you are talking to anybody that's vulnerable, any kind of vulnerable user, and you do need to think about, are you using a personal profile to do that? So on any kind of organizational basis, they should be providing you with the technology, and that includes the team profiles, etc., so that you can communicate with people and it's not done on a personal basis. Part of me, I sort of think, we should be okay to be us online. It shouldn't be terrible to just be human being. I do think we have a problem in the UK that we like to bring people down, right? So when something goes wrong, at the moment, it's like it was never okay to make a mistake. So even if it was 15 years ago that somebody did that tweet, we'll bring them down now. They can't possibly have changed. So we might see some changes to all of that. On the other side, of course, you've got your right to a private and a personal life, and we live online now. Absolutely. So if you feel it's appropriate and you want to set up multiple profiles, then by all means do that. It's only going to get more and more, right? We're going to do more and more and more of how we engage with other people professionally and personally using technology. So again, we come back to this idea of being mindful.
I can answer that. I actually have separate accounts. I have a personal account that's actually a creative nonfiction account, and then I've got a professional account, which I alluded to that I didn't do enough to upkeep. But actually, I would speak to myself and defend myself on that point. I think some people just like to see a professional presence, and you don't necessarily have to be active. I know I've looked at several, even CMOs, chief marketing officers, and their Twitter account, and they have thousands and thousands of followers, but they've not had a tweet since 2017 or 2018. But they've got a robust account with a following base. And sometimes that's just what matters at that point. Think of it as your social media platforms could be a website. They're evergreen material that's there for people to reference.
The other things I would just quickly point in there as well is future proofing as well. So whatever you do for a job right now, where are you going to go in future, right? So if you think you're ever going to get a job that's in a political environment, maybe you need to think about what you're posting right now if there's political aspects to that. Yeah. Also, organizations, certainly the senior management in an organization, their reputation is going to reflect on the reputation of the organization. So just have a little bit of a think about that and what the impact is, either way, actually, of the kind of linkage of your personal and professional lives online.
I would also add to that, if you're a senior at that level where you are perhaps coming across now on your social media as a thought leader, or you're producing think pieces as your content, perhaps now is the time to hire someone to help manage your accounts and be a little bit more intentional and objective in what you're posting.
Great, thank you. I suppose related to some of that, Jess, you said in your talk that we're very good at signing up to things, but we're not so good at unsigning things. But there's always going to be more and more things to sign up to as well. So if you're determined to just cull your internet presence to just 2 or 3 channels, which ones, well, for both of you, which ones would you choose?
So, I'll talk not specifically to channels, I suppose, but you would be surprised at how many things you've signed up to. Anybody that uses Password Manager, that's an app that you get on your phone or on a device to manage all your passwords. You'll know you've got hundreds of things in there that you signed up, and that's everything. That's not just your kind of channels that you're delivering content on, but it's shops, it's all kind of stuff. So there is a much broader thing here about your kind of security online, about having good passwords, but also pruning. And there are tools that you can find online, for example, that you can put your email address in, and they'll tell you all the different social media profiles that you've actually got set up, so you can go and start deleting them. So I would definitely, in terms of the actual platforms, Lynda-Marie will tell you better than that about what's going to work for you, but not just now and in the future. Do be mindful again about owning some assets, right? So if you've got a particular brand name or your own name or something like that, and there's a social media platform that you're not on, but it's quite big, maybe you want to get on there, even if it's just to claim that space so that nobody else does.
Like TikTok, that's a great example. You want to claim that handle. One of the things I would say is everyone says, which is the platform to go to? And again, that is a individual decision, but be mindful of what's going on in the world right now. Social media is changing. We are starting to see the threat of regulation. Jess's comment to owning your own assets is more important now than ever. Make sure you've got a backup copy of everything that you're posting online. Definitely your photos as well. There was another aspect to that question that just slipped my mind. Sorry. I wanted to tell a quick story to Jess's point. So in 2002, while I was still living in a different area in North Carolina, I was thinking of moving to New York, and I put on a web forum, hi, I'm thinking of moving to New York, where can I find, the cheapest place? That showed up for 10 years. And I posted it in 2002. It came up again in 2008, and I actually had to go in and edit it because I couldn't delete it. So I literally had to go in and edit that question out, and it says edited. Now that happened to someone I knew who was a writer, and she wrote a rather revealing, it's not me, a rather revealing story about courting, and posted it on one of the self-publishing platforms that you can do, and then was going in for a job and decided that that was a little bit too embarrassing and wanted to take it down. She could go in and take the story down, but she couldn't change the title. So just be mindful of what you're posting and being sure that you can change it, because now if you Google her name, she's a professional, but she's got this story of being a hoarder that's just following her wherever she goes.
And related to the social media angle, we've got another audience question. Do you have any quick outlines for social media strategies?
How can I give you my professional advice for free in a matter of 10 minutes? Can they be a little bit more specific? Perhaps they can take an aspect of a strategy and speak to that.
Yeah, it's an anonymous question, so if you'd like to add anything more to that, that would be helpful. But yeah, I suppose, where do people start with social media strategies? That might be one way to tackle that, if you've got any brief advice.
Your strategy should speak to your goal. So that's why I'm asking to be a little bit more specific. It's what is your goal that you're trying to achieve?
Well, while we're waiting, sorry, go ahead.
No, sorry, go ahead.
Well, while we're waiting for a bit more information on that, I was wondering if you could tell us a bit about the tool that you both used just now, actually, because I guess most of the time when we use Zoom, we're just used to using screen sharing, but what you used was a bit different and kind of cool. So what was it called, and how did you
I will let Jess speak to that, because that's her
that's my thing. Yeah. So I use an alternative to PowerPoint called Prezi. And it's spelled Prezi. And I've been using it for a few years, really. It's quite resource intensive, but it's good for creating presentations because it has quite a nice zoomy function. But they've also added on this video aspect, which is this basically, so that you can have content on screen with you at the same time. I just find that it's really helpful for this kind of thing where you're trying to get. It's difficult to get audience engagement, right? When you're in this kind of situation, because we don't know each other. So anything that we can do to kind of help that, I think is really important. And so that's why we kind of decided to use Prezi Video today. So that's the one, Prezi. Obviously there's different tiers of kind of cost for it. It's a subscription-based service for you to develop presentations.
Just make sure you're used to it, as you could see from my earlier presentation, how I was in the middle of the screen. But
yeah, it takes a bit of learning. It does take a bit of learning. It's definitely like I would suggest if you do a lot of stuff, a lot of presentations, it's worth doing. If you're only doing one in 6 months, it probably isn't worth it.
Cool. We don't have any extra information for that question just yet. So I was wondering if we could maybe, I think we're sort of looking at wrapping up now. It's nearly 10 to 3 or just after that. And thank you both for your insights. It's been super, super interesting. And I've also really liked how you both don't always agree as well. It's really to get that rounded feeling on things. But if people that are on the call, if they want to hang up and go and like pay attention to their virtual self, what 3 things do you think they should do right now after they leave this meeting?
Who's going first? So 3 things they should do. Oh, go on. No, go on. Lynda-Marie, you go first.
Well, I think the first thing you should do is what you would speak to, Jess, and that's just kind of do an inventory of what's out there. The second thing I would do is say, once you figure out what's out there, what do you want to be out there? And then how do you want that message to be delivered? And that's your platform.
Yeah. And I would just add to that, obviously, all the practical stuff that I talked about, which is looking yourself up, using some of the tools, find out what's there and what you want to create. And really that idea of kind of being purposeful. The other thing we haven't really touched on is who you follow, who's your network, who's influencing you online, because there's that phrase, you are your network. So how you come across online is going to be influenced by what you see other people doing. So again, look to who you want to be, who you think are good thought leaders, and connect with them and use them as kind of to influence who you are.
And I would also say, especially now as we are exposing ourselves, don't be afraid or don't be easily flustered by what could be out with your control. Clearly right now you might hear that there are children screaming in the background. Those are my lovely neighbors. I have no control over that. So I can only say that I go with the flow, and people will usually understand that. But you're giving us a round of applause, so thank you. I'll take that as my cue.
Adds to the authenticity. Great. Well, thank you both so much. Jess, would you mind putting back the Prezi thing up because it's got both your Twitter handles on. So if anyone would like to get in touch with Jess or Lynda-Marie or ask them more questions, whether whatever that's about, then please do. And yeah, thank you so much for being with us today. Thank you, Jess and Lynda-Marie. I'm going to give you a virtual round of applause. Please do come to our next webinar as well. That's also next Tuesday at 2 p.m. And that's with Isabella Gissemi-Smith from Seed Legals. The details for that are on our website. So yeah, sign up for that same time next week. But for now, thank you, Jess and Lynda-Marie, and we'll see you all next week.
Thank you.
Very much. Thank you.
To DM ask questions as well.
Yeah.
Help us online. Thanks.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.